A tense silence hung over Port Charles as talk of the case followed Joss's brother everywhere he went. What started as suspicion had turned into quiet judgment from neighbors, friends, and even a few familiar faces at the hospital. He felt like he was walking through town with a shadow he couldn't shake. Joss stood by him, but the strain showed. Every conversation ended the same way, with uncertainty and frustration. She knew her brother was telling the truth, yet no one seemed willing to look past the surface. Kai, however, noticed something others didn't. The story people accepted so easily didn't fully line up. Small details were off. Timelines didn't match. A statement from a witness had changed slightly between reports, and no one questioned why. Instead of letting it go, Kai started retracing the events from the beginning. He visited the pier where the incident supposedly began. He checked nearby businesses and asked about security systems. Most cameras had nothing useful, except one old system at a bait shop that had been overlooked. The owner mentioned the footage had been requested once, then never mentioned again. That raised a red flag. When Kai finally reviewed what was left of the recording, he saw a figure moving quickly past the frame at a time when Joss's brother had been said to be somewhere else. The image was blurry, but one thing was clear. The person's build and clothing didn't match him at all. Kai showed Joss. Her hands shook as she leaned closer to the screen. "That's the proof we needed," she said. But why had no one followed up on this? Digging deeper, Kai discovered that a report referencing this camera had been marked as inconclusive without explanation. Someone had decided early on that it wasn't worth examining, or perhaps didn't want it examined at all. Word began to spread quietly that new evidence might change everything. People who had avoided Joss's family suddenly became curious. Questions replaced assumptions. The real turning point came when Kai spoke with a delivery driver who had been in the area that night. After seeing the still image from the footage, the driver hesitated, then admitted he remembered seeing someone matching that description, arguing with another person near the docks. It wasn't Joss's brother. The pieces started fitting together in a way they never had before. When Kai presented the findings to those who needed to see it, the reaction was immediate. Confusion turned into realization. The narrative people had accepted for weeks began to fall apart. Joss's brother hadn't been involved the way everyone believed. He had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and someone else had taken advantage of that. For the first time in weeks, Joss saw relief on her brother's face. The weight he'd been carrying slowly lifted as people began to acknowledge what should have been clear from the start. Still, one question lingered in Kai's mind. If this evidence had been ignored before, who made sure it stayed hidden? The question wouldn't leave Kai's mind. If the footage had been dismissed so quickly and the report quietly labeled inconclusive, someone had made a deliberate choice. This wasn't an accident, it was a decision. And decisions like that in Port Charles were rarely random. Kai returned to the bait shop and asked the owner for one more favor, the exact date and time when the footage had first been requested. After checking an old logbook, the owner gave him a name tied to the request. It wasn't an officer, it wasn't an investigator. It was someone connected to a private legal office in town. Kai felt a chill run through him. Why would a private office be interested in security footage before the authorities had fully reviewed it? Meanwhile, Joss's brother began noticing a shift in how people treated him. Conversations were less guarded. Apologies started coming in small, awkward waves. But the relief he felt was mixed with anger. Someone had let him carry this burden for weeks when the truth had sitting on a forgotten hard drive. Joss, on the other hand, was focused on one thing, finding out who had benefited from keeping her brother under suspicion. When Kai shared what he'd learned about the footage request, Joss's eyes widened. "That means this started before anyone even questioned him," she said. "Someone was already trying to control the story." They began looking into the legal office connection. It didn't take long to find that the office had recently represented a client who had been quietly involved in a dispute near the docks at the same time as the incident. The details had never made headlines, but the timing was too close to ignore. Kai tracked down a former assistant from the office who no longer worked there. Nervous but willing to talk, she revealed that she had been told to retrieve any nearby recordings from the pier area for a client who was desperate to avoid attention. She never knew why, but now it made sense. The client didn't want evidence erased, just redirected. By the time Kai and Joss put the timeline together, the picture was clear. Joss's brother hadn't been framed directly. He had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and someone else had taken advantage of that. The realization hit hard. Someone powerful had allowed an innocent person to be judged to protect themselves. As this information began circulating among a few trusted people, tension rose across Port Charles. The truth was getting too close to the surface for comfort, and whoever had worked so hard to keep it hidden was about to realize that Kai wasn't going to
barely
stop
slept
digging.
that night. The more he replayed the timeline in his head, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't just about overlooked evidence anymore. It was about influence, quiet favors, and carefully timed decisions. By morning, he and Joss had a new lead. The former assistant from the legal office remembered one more detail. The client had insisted on meeting late at night, avoiding the front entrance and using a side door that faced the alley. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it felt important. Kai checked nearby businesses along that alley. Most had updated their systems recently, but one old pharmacy still kept archived footage from months back. After a few conversations and a lot of patience, Kai was allowed to review the recordings from that week. There it was, a familiar face slipping through the alley toward the side entrance of the legal office. Joss stared at the screen, stunned. She recognized the person immediately, someone respected, someone who had been openly sympathetic during her brother's ordeal, someone who had looked her in the eye and said they hoped the truth would come out. "They knew," she said quietly. "They knew the whole time." The realization hurt more than the weeks of suspicion. This wasn't a stranger trying to protect themselves. This was someone inside their circle who had watched their family struggle and said nothing. Kai urged caution. They needed to be sure before confronting anyone. But word of their investigation had already started to ripple through Port Charles. Questions were being asked. People were connecting dots on their own. And the person in that footage had noticed. Joss's brother received an unexpected visit that afternoon. The visitor didn't come with accusations or apologies, just nervous small talk and a strange attempt to gauge how much he knew. It was obvious they were fishing for information. After they left, Joss's brother called Kai immediately. "I think they're worried, really worried." That was the confirmation Kai needed. They weren't just uncovering the truth anymore. They were getting close enough to make someone uncomfortable. By evening, Kai had gathered everything: the pier footage, the logbook entry, the assistant statement, the alley recording. Individually, each piece raised questions. Together, they told a story no one could ignore. A story of how suspicion had been allowed to fall on the wrong person, while the right one quietly pulled strings behind the scenes. Joss looked at Kai, her voice steady despite everything. "It's time," she said. "They don't get to hide behind this anymore." Joss didn't hesitate. She asked Kai to come with her, and together they went to the one place where they knew the truth couldn't be brushed aside. A small gathering at the Metro Court where several familiar faces were already seated, including the person from the alley footage. The mood shifted the moment Joss and Kai walked in. Conversations softened. Eyes followed them. There was an unspoken awareness in the room that something significant was about to happen. Joss's brother arrived a few minutes later, calm but resolute. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look weighed down. He looked ready. Kai placed a folder on the table. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the sequence of events. the forgotten camera, the early footage request, the assistant's memory, the alley recording. Step by step, he let the evidence speak for itself. The room grew quieter with every detail. Then Joss turned the tablet screen toward the group and paused on the image from the pharmacy camera. No one needed to ask who it was. The person at the center of it all went pale. Their confident posture disappeared, replaced by visible unease. They tried to explain at first, saying it was a misunderstanding, that they had only been trying to protect themselves from unrelated trouble near the docks. But the more they spoke, the clearer it became. They knew that the footage could raise questions. They had acted quickly to make sure no one looked too closely, and when suspicion landed on Joss's brother, they had stayed silent, because it was easier than correcting the story. "I never meant for it to go this far," they admitted quietly. Joss's brother finally spoke. "But you let it," he said. Those words carried more weight than any accusation. Around the table, reactions ranged from shock to disappointment. This was someone people trusted, someone who had been part of their lives for years. Realizing that they had allowed an innocent person to carry blame to protect themselves was hard to process. Joss felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger for what her family had endured, relief that the truth was finally out in the open where it belonged. Kai watched carefully. This wasn't about humiliation, it was about accountability. By the end of the conversation, there was no denying what had happened. Apologies came, but they felt small compared to the weeks of damage. As everyone slowly dispersed, the air in the room felt lighter. Joss's brother stepped outside and took a deep breath, like he was finally able to do so without a weight on his chest. "It's over," he said. Kai nodded, but he knew something important had changed in Port Charles. Trust had been shaken. Relationships would take time to mend. Still, the most important thing had been restored. The truth had found its way back to where it belonged.